One afternoon, I'm Karenann McDonald. I'm a 13th White Bear klanmother, and I have the esteemed pleasure and honor to be with eagle.eye.man. And if you haven't seen our first three parts, or you haven't seen his writings, universal writings of Meredith Quinn, you can also see me on my channel on Karenann McDonald. But we also are going to refer you to Looking at Tribal Laws, Mr. Meredith Quinn, and some presentations done not only by Lester House, but also at Mending the Sacred Hoop, where Eagle Eye, you've done several videos with Saviva, and we've done quite a few over the years. But we're going to talk about something called the Great Matriarch by Musa, otherwise known as Moses. So the Arabic term is the Great Musa. So I'm going to let you take it away, and I'm going to do some screen sharing here from the PDF that we have, and also direct people to your Facebook page at Universal Writings of Meredith Quinn. Take it away. It's up to you. You could introduce yourself briefly.
Niakihu Muskizik Napu, an eagle-eye-man, called eagle-eye-man. And the Facebook page Karen's referring to is Universal Law, the writings of Meredith Quinn. And there's quite a bit of Meredith's writings, different things that he's taught, posted on that page. And as for the Great Matriarch, Karen, I'll comment on it, but you'll have to, as I say, read the story, and whenever there's something you want me to comment on, I will if I can.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one of the first things we want to do is I want to take you to Facebook. Okay, so this is where you're going to see all the hard work that Eagle Eye's been putting in for like what, 15 years, 20, I think we've been at it. But this is the page, Universal Law of Meredith Quinn. In there's quite a bit, and each one you have to open up. And, talking about the judges, how they know about this different law, how people on the bands of the reserves are classified as prisoner of wars and inhabitants. So as you keep going through a lot of these different pages we refer to, like the Casa Submissus being the clan mother, and Wavoka, and what tribal governments are. That's what a sovereign is. A sovereign is not someone that belongs to a private member's organization or an association, or you've done a 1099, or you filed out your uniform commercial codes. That's not what a sovereign is. And neither is someone that's doing common law. And neither is someone on a band of reserve. So even the judges have said that. So if you want some really amazing information, Eagle Eye's put a lot in here, and who the real entitled owners are. I don't like that word, but who have entitlement and signatory authority, just like that famous movie. One is Avatar, and the second one is Jupiter Ascending. And there's a bunch of amazing stuff that you do have here. So one of the things, I just wanted to bring them there. And then the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to go through a little document that was given to me. And this is going to be about 30 some pages out of basically what we would call here the Great Matriarch. And so I'm going to do a little bit of like discussing about it, and we can have a little bit of more enlightened discussion because Eagle Eye is here to help us through it. So, and you've been doing this for a number of years, at least 20 that I know about. So here's the Great Matriarch. This is 30 some pages here. We're just going to flip through here. Now, the Arabic name was Musa. In other words, he was the scribe and a lawgiver for those clan mothers, for those tribes, otherwise known as Moses. So we're going to go through a little bit of here. And one of the first things up here, if you want to make some comments here, is that who was Meredith Quinn and who is Agnes Strikehead? Eagle. Those are one of the things in here that we will look at, because one of the things is that Agnes Strikehead was actually related to Meredith Quinn. And so one of the things that it passed a lot of information down, because she still had a noble and royal bloodline and still knew the original systems, as people think ancient government systems. So Eagle, do you want to comment on a little bit of this and what your knowledge is and about Wounded Knee?
Yes, from what I've read Meredith's writings, Agnes strikes hard is her calling strikes hard. That was Meredith's grandmother. And she was the last head clan mother of the Dakota tribe. And she was recognized and acknowledged as such by the United States government. So, as Meredith said, she could command the United States to do things, and they actually did. Forgive me, I'm getting a bit of cold here. So that's who she was, last head clan mother, and she was also Meredith's grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
So she was raised with all the ancient knowledge, tribal custom and usage, all the old history that was untainted, untouched by the white man's propaganda, like a direct transmission through the ages, oral history. And you'd have to carry on in the story. As I said, it's been a while since I read it.
Okay,
what was the other point you wanted covered?
One of the things too is that her grandson, Meredith Quinn, had actually started translating some of the information that she had given to him in the Sioux language and started putting down some papers and some booklets together, which are very hard to get a hold of, I might add. These are things that we need to add on and get a different website, because there are several of us that hold it. And I know I've gone to sacred gatherings at Protecting the Sacred with the Lillooet tribes. And, I sent out like thousands of this stuff all over the world. But this is something that we need to bring into a consolidated site, which we acknowledge. But one of the things in here that was very interesting is that she talked about what happened, actually different things at Wounded Knee, where the military was set up and tried to kill her. And as were they trying to basically eradicate anyone that was a carrier, not only verbally, but also through the genetic bloodlines. And what is your knowledge of this, where they tried to, eradicate First Nations and all Star Nations and all tribal people? What is your knowledge of that to this day?
Well, they've tried doing that through religion, basically, and getting Indians not to be of their original law, original religion, that the clan mother.
And so a lot of stuff in here that we find that a lot of them came together and they were, gathering in different meetings. We even had one here, as people think British Columbia, but in Gustafson Lake. So it's not that long ago, in the 90s, not even 30 years ago, that basically the RCMP and other people have come up, as other militaries have been with Standing Rock or any other thing we've seen come up against, trying to prevent people from, one, educating people, re-educating the people, like, as you said, they're white, black, and red tribes as well, that hold not only their Noah's Ark Treaty, but their Solomon Seal and Palladium of Troy, along with, other people that have their wampum belts or peace pipes. But one of the things in here was, bringing forward that great tribal knowledge, where they started talking about their songs, their dances, and getting in touch with the Creator and the Great Spirit, and also synchronizing in time. Now, one of the interesting things is that a lot of the people, like the National Guards, came with weapons and they were knocking down their tents. And not only were they hurting the elders and clan mothers, actually, we saw a little bit of that, I'm sure, in the convoy in Ottawa. Things have a way of repeating themselves in here. But like you said, a lot of people don't know their jurisdiction. And this was really, really important in here. So she talked, a lot about having the celebrations and, how they basically, people were taken, some of the children were picked up, beaten to death, or gone and put into these residential schools, which of course we're seeing the whole kerfuffle of what happened in Kamloops up here, right? With the lack of bodies being produced. Again, people putting agendas and narratives through. And now the government's now blocking them out. So, you can't even get information without it being redacted. But this was one of the interesting things in here, that she talked about the House of the Dawn and the dawn rituals and stuff like this. And I know you know a lot about some of the archaeology, and Vero and Melbourne Man. She talked a lot about how that these tribal units had survived, and even through the ice ages, they lived in peace with whether it be the dinosaurs or whatever it was, but maintaining their original medicines, foods, and that type of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that, which ties into, not only the Vero but Melbourne man, but this comes in through what people know are descendants of Mu or some of them of Atlantis. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe the Time Walkers Society a bit, please? Eagle, are you able to unmute just a little bit about the Vero man or Melbourne man and
Yes,
evolution?
I didn't
Okay.
realize I was muted.
Yep.
I was just saying, okay, you touched on Mu and Atlantis. Mu was the first civilization, advanced civilization built by Indians to show the civilized world that you could do an advanced civilization in harmony with nature. Atlantis was the second civilization built by Indians to show the civilized you could build an advanced civilization in harmony with nature. Both of them were destroyed by the civilized, one by fire, one by water. Um, so the descendants of those Mu and Atlantis are the North American Indians, South American Indians of today. There is a tribe called the Atlantes, I think, somewhere in Florida, or around that coastline area somewhere.
Mhm.
And the designs on their pottery relate to the Atlantean. It's the same people's descendants of that area. The secret archaeological find not of 1917, 1918 called the Vero Melbourne Man. And Meredith said that was an archaeolocal find where they discovered the bones of Indians beside the bones of dinosaurs. And they carbon dated them to around, he said, about 10,000 years old.
Mhm.
Now, the reason why it was a secret find is because the bone structure of the Indian, their clothing, their cooking implements, the food
Right.
was the same, unchanged to the Indian on the reservation today, basically. So what that showed is that there was no evolution from the time of the dinosaurs being alive, and also showed that dinosaurs didn't live millions of years ago. They
Mhm.
were around 2 ice ages ago, because
Right.
an ice age happens about every 5,000 years. The Great Migration. To the Indians, a Great Migration is when this world-changing event is happening. And the white man calls it an ice age that ends in a global catastrophe, because for them it always does. So it was kept hidden because it would disprove Darwin's theory of evolution. And a lot of the white man's law is based on that theory as well.
I think that that's an excellent point. Like a lot of people are not aware of these significant findings. Some people we will talk about Tartaria, mud flood city, star forts as well. But when you get into here, these were found near Vero, Florida. Hey, it's not that far, in there, and it was found, just over 100 and some years ago. But they date anywhere from 2.5 million to 11,000 years ago. And so this is actually a really significant find. And when you get into that, now we start looking at the genetic lines of, what's been going on with people. So in here, like I said, people have to be well aware of what's been going on. Because like I said, a lot of these people, through these different excavations and stuff and paleontological digs, that it was the same thing in there as well. And so, like I said, a lot of people, you may be unaware of it, but when you start putting into genetics and who's who in the zoo and where do some of these things come from, it's a huge thing. And the Melbourne man, was found along actually a country club and golf course in Australia as well, and so there's been many different places that have been able to show what's been going on. One of the other things too is that I think people need to really be aware of is what we call Tartarian, right? Those are some of my different ancestors as well. And the Tartarian maps, as we look at them, we're seeing again the Pires Reis maps and other things that do not correlate when a lot of these actual treaties were initiated or agreed to. And so it's not based on what is today, it's based on what you said, again, with the original laws and languages and customs. So again, looking at some of these different mapping systems are not the same thing because of the wars, invasions, acquisitions, even with natural disasters. So there's a lot to be said for knowing your actual history. So, as we go back a little bit into what we were talking about with Meredith Quinn and what actually, the Great Matriarch documents were about. It was about getting information out to the people in here about what was going on. And so I think that's a really huge thing that we've gone on such a large journey. And one of the things that was really interesting to me is when she talked about how the stories of, again, the white tribes, not white races, but the white tribes and the red tribes were living together in peace and had a large population. And they actually lived together with their actual treaties into place. And so one of the things in here, it was really interesting. They talked about the map of Minneapolis and St. Paul's because in the Tartarian, or back before the 1800s, it shows that the capital of the Dakota, some people say Dakota, potato. You can also say Dakota, that's known as the Star Nations, like the Octarians and Bear Clan and other things as well. And going into here, but I thought that was very, very interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you know about the Dakota Empire and what really Meredith Quinn was talking about that had been passed down? What would you say
Um,
in regards to that?
I don't really know too much about it. Meredith talks about the Dakota Empire
Right.
and the capital city of the Dakota Empire. I think it is it Minneapolis?
Minneapolis and St. Paul in there was shown to be, again, one was
Yeah,
the capital of the empire itself. So we're not talking about the state, we're talking about the empire and tribes there, which I thought
yeah,
was,
the
yeah.
Dakota Empire is the capital city of the empire. And the white man knows about these. That's why they desecrated the sites as well. I think he said they like there's a couple of different sites that were important in the Dakota Empire,
Mm-hmm.
and how they bulldozed over one and put a hospital on it or and a graveyard on it, like something over those particular plots, sort of thing, right? Covered them up and desecrated them, kind of thing.
Right, which is really interesting. And she talked about certain treaties that were signed without any clan mother's knowledge. So a lot of these statutes and limitations and up in, they think the de facto whatever area of Canada, like Treaty One, Treaty Six, whatever, it's not really in there because they were never signed. Clan mothers
All
didn't
of
even know about these, like,
all of treaties 1 to 11 are treaties. They're not a treaty. They were
exactly.
not signed by sovereigns. They weren't signed by sovereigns on the Indian side, and they weren't signed by a sovereign on the crown side either, because they weren't signing in a sovereign capacity for the crown either. They're just international agreements that can be called a treaty. That's all. They're not a treaty to the specific legal technical meaning of the term, because a treaty is an agreement between two sovereign nations, and there was no sovereigns on either side of those agreements. But they are international because they were made with an Indian, and an Indian is international in nature. Any agreement at all an Indian makes, you could call it a treaty. Gets a driver's license, gets a health card, you could call those treaties
I think that's
because
really important to
they're
what
made with
you
an
hear.
Indian and it's an agreement with the Indian. So it's international in nature because the Indian is international in nature. Thus, it's a treatise, international agreement, and it can be called a treaty. Treaties 1 to 11.
Now, interesting what they talk about. They talk about the hostiles, right? The hostile Indians that were sovereigns of the Dakota Empire compared to, the nationals, or to basically sell out some bands and reserves here. So I think that that's a very, very important distinction to make. It's not only genetics, it's what blood type is, it's everything because everything's been so infiltrated lately. And so a lot of the information went through some of the history into here, what had happened things to do with what happened to the hostile Sioux, including what happened under Sitting Bull and Chief Crazy Horse. And I remember being invited to be in the into the lodge and being at Chief Crazy Horse's pipe ceremony at Protecting the Sacred at Lillooet when that was hand delivered in there with a few handful of us. But as you go through again, what's happened to the United States and what they've done in splitting things up, that basically these people were being punished here. And Sitting Bull and all these sovereigns, you know, even to the 1870s, right, were trying to fulfill their international law duties as, you know, headsmen, dragons, some people think as chieftains or whatever, but of those areas to protect the women and the children and the people they were in, you know, put into. And it's interesting that in international law, it says, and again, as you talked about earlier, or we've heard about civilized nations, right? Right. That until they had met with the head clan mothers, that basically even Judge Urban had said in as early as 1975, with the court case of Consolidated Wounded Knee versus the United States, that you said it was very, very clear. He said it's a case of casus omissus. They didn't have anyone and they didn't know who they were going into the courts. Now, one of the interesting things that you talked about, and we talked about in part two, was really the hololinguistics of the language, and that people really don't know how to speak properly anymore. Is that it's interesting as we go back into whether it's the Queen's or Justinian law or whatever, but back to 451, can you talk a little bit about the Bedini scholars of England and how they started retranslating all those Bibles used in churches today and in courtrooms, I might add, and some of the things that they omitted, which was the Book of the War of the Lords, which I happen to know someone that's actually read it underneath the Vatican. Can you speak a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, Meredith talks about how the monks of the Peterborough monastery, and then after them, the Bidet monks,
Yeah,
retranslated or rewrote the Bible to make the was it King James Bible as the authorized Bible? I think it was they're the ones that created the King James Bible and took out, as you said, omitted certain parts of it so that they weren't readily available. Book of the Words of the Lord. There's a few different parts, like the instructions how the clan mothers instruct the chiefs to ceremonies to do to control the forces of nature, different things like that. It's a long time since I've refreshed my memory on Meredith's works, though. I can't really remember too much right off the top of my head about it.
well, I think it was interesting. You know, I've been to between Saskatchewan and Alberta, as people like to think that jurisdiction, but in that lower part of the Cree area in there and getting into the Dakota areas is a place where the RCMP set up the musical ride, but also more importantly, that's where Sitting Bull was. And so when you start getting some of this history, why they were bringing people up was like the avatar tree there. But it was interesting that Sitting Bull had said, I am here by the will of the Great Spirit, and by his will, I am a chief. As you say, you do not know who I am. I want you to tell it is owned by the Great Spirit that has chosen anyone to be the chief of this. Again, it would be tribe, which is myself. And I think it's really interesting that, again, he was put into exile into Canada, right? And again, referred as well to these books of the War of the Lord. You know,
if you study how the words that Sitting Bull uses, how he presented himself and how he spoke,
exactly,
he actually spoke exactly, precisely proper according to international law. Like he spoke as a sovereign. Everything he said there is the legal premise and foundation for his authority. In legal terms, is what I'm trying to express. And the white man would have recognized and knows, which was the problem. That's why they were hostile, because the Americans wanted their land, so they're hostiles.
Well, I think it is so correct what you're saying with Sitting Bull's speech, right? That he did before the commission in 1883, right? That authority came up and he talked about it. And it was actually referenced in Numbers 21:14 to 28, which gives actually the power of the women of the clans and their equations, how they're applied, and to elect their chiefs, dragons, whatever, in there. But they also were referred the women to the daughters of the Great Spirit, or angels, or the right angles. Sometimes I would say DNA angles of pure light. And this is when they became subject to the firstborn women. I remember my Gita, my grandfather, Peter J. Buzakovich, that was in the military. He was just always drilling, just remember you're from the church of the firstborn. you know, we have things writing here. But it was interesting. As Sitting Bull spoke about this pure international law that D. Brown usually wrote a book later on, burying my heart at Wounded Lee. Like I said, he was talking in an exact language, right? And people have really lost, I think, a lot of that. And it's amazing what they did, to try and shut down what was going on. And it was interesting that he said at that time, he says, there's really no, savage or sovereigns or like Indians left by himself, because a lot of the people had split off and signed to go into, with the government and being conjoiner with him. So that was really, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, going through these documents here. And there's about 30 some pages and stuff, and these things can be made available on your site. And, if people have any questions, I'll put some of the links and stuff below here. But it's basically because I wanted to, get into people that there's a lot of documentation. I mean, not just, written or in oral form, but there's literally, like we talked about, copper plates. There are obelisks all over the world that were put into that. And that this is how it had been, put into place for people to come back to follow these original laws. And I want to really thank you for trying to maintain the integrity and trying to get this information out, on here. But what is a really great way to get a hold of you, Tim? And where do you see some of these things that you're doing on Universal Writings of Meredith Quinn? Where they can find some of this information and how to get a hold of you? What would you like to suggest, or where would you like to see this going, or how can people contact you to expand on these concepts?
Well, on the page Universal Law, the writings of Meredith Quinn, I can be contacted through there. And as I said, there's a lot of information on there already.
Mm-hmm.
Explain quite a bit of stuff, but I can be contacted through there.
Okay.
Message me through there.
And you have put up a lot of this vital information, just talking about this. Like I said, people always think in terms of Christian as scripturally, like, with the numbers or whatever, but they've forgotten where these originally came from. And that there are books that were taken into the British Museum that predates the Septuagint by what, couple thousand years, like really, right? And not just the Book of the Lords that we see by Seymour Feldman and stuff like that talk about the angels. Originally, the guardian angels to me really were the head matriarchs in there. And I did some really amazing videos actually with Larry Levan. He was also part of my clan and tribe, but he was a former Navy Jaguar. And we did a lot of stuff digging into this original stuff here, back to the Aztec stone and stuff like that, because a lot of these things were put in. It's just people don't know how to find them. They're just outside of Mexico, that these are sacred writings or sacred documents and stuff like that. Or, like I said, even what the obelisk did. And these were well before Columbus came here or Cortez came here, a whole bunch of pirates who came here with these sigils, that knew damn well what they were doing to take people back, not only for killing, but they took a lot of these back, as you're aware, called the long pig or the long stick, or, a pig roast. Today we would know it as, adrenochrome, or, all sorts of things in here. So is there anything you'd like to spend the last couple minutes just that comes to you that people need to know?
Yeah. Okay, you brought up the word dragons and then whatever a few times. A dragon is a chief picked by a woman from the white tribe. Like Sitting Bull was not a dragon because he's not from a white tribe.
Right.
He would have been whatever the term was in the language for like the headman,
Mm-hmm.
Ugamau in the Cree. And the number 666, what a lot of people think is a bad number, 666, number of the beast, mark of the beast,
Mm-hmm.
is actually an old tribal equation for time. It's the time equation. And the
Right.
reason why I brought up the dragon is because it says the dragon gave the power of 666 to the beast.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he told the Romans the power of the old tribal time equation formula,
Right.
because 666 is how you work out your born day, etc., etc. It's to do with timing, timing of everything.
Right. Now, one of the things
So,
that's really important, like I'm just putting on the, just so people can see here, it says July 2nd, 408 AD, chief or dragon Alaric with the Saxons, Anglia, Mercia, and Northumbria, members of the Cleopatra tribe, conquered and sacked the Roman Empire. And also, when they were doing some of these treaties, that they actually are on the walls north of Mexico, where the Dakota leaders were present and watched the signing of these treaties. So as you said, some of these things to do with the 666 and different things that happened are actually documentable. And this is before they started coming in trying to buy or, slaughter people for the February 1491, like your 1492 or 1776 type of thing for their republics. So I think that's a really excellent point that you bring through. And yeah, I'm just going to encourage people to do their own studies here. Is there anything else that you think would be helpful for people to go look at or to study on their own here?
well, like I said, you go look at the page and there's quite a bit of information already posted on there, right, that take a while to assimilate. And you can message me on there for more help information.
I think, yeah, that's an excellent thing we'll bring by in there. So this really covers most of the different pages. I just wanted to go over it, with people here that they knew how these things came to be. And, in here, some of the documentations where you see long before Judge Urban, which is down the US, but also there was Judge C.C. Curran in Canada also. But actually, these are the actual court cases that actually talk about the Casas Omissus and stuff like that, and how he was telling these Indians that, there's a way to still attain sovereignty, right? But you have to go back to those original things. And reservation Indians claiming to be or identifying themselves as Native Americans or claiming to be sovereign savages just are not. And so there are court cases already into place, which I thought was really interesting and validate what you're saying, and that tribes have to go by the matriarchal system where they worked in conjunction and appointed the men as well. And it's not, it was a total female thing. It was actually appointing the male councils and stuff in there. And I think that's really important that those men could be in a protective role. And that's where men have got to come back into their divine masculine and divine feminine. Same thing with the women coming back into asserting who they are and knowing those original customs, usages, and laws, and the original rituals that we knew around, the processional and the land and the space and the stars and the constellations in there. So I really want to thank you for taking your time and doing the education. One of the other things that I thought was really interesting is that you've spent some time as well. I think it was with Saviva at something called Mending the Sacred Hoop. I know you've done some stuff there. And also, I think you've done a couple of radio shows talking as well. But I think this is by far, I think, one of the most profound things that you've done. And just, well, we've got about 2-3 minutes left here. Eagle, could you talk a little bit just about, you were dabbling with, I think it was Chat GPT, was it? Could you talk to me a little bit just for a few minutes about what you found and what you're training the AI here to do?
Well, you're referring to like when I just asked it the question, why did the Queen of England do as she was commanded by some clanmothers? That first one I sent you there.
Yeah,
Um,
I have to share that because it's too funny, actually. Just, well, we've got about
and
two
so,
minutes left.
yeah, if you can put it up so they can read it themselves, it's explanatory, really. But
Yeah, you
I
got
just
it.
asked it the question, why would the Queen of England do as she's told by some American Indian grandmothers? And it replied and gave me the exact answer to do with customary international law and sovereignty, what sovereignty is, how it's expressed, and why it would be binding on a European monarch. In other
And,
words, why the Queen of England did as she was told to do by an American Indian clan mother.
and what did it say about this binding customary law here? That she had to listen. And that was part of what I did when I filed into Kamloops back in 2013 and 14 to remove her, have them charged for international crimes against the nations and tribes. Not a great thing to be a enemy of the tribes and the nations, let me tell you. But I thought this was really quite principled here when it says, it's got to be signed by, and here you have it here. Only agreement signed by two recognized, basically, people with that signatory authority are the only ones that can have that. And that is binding under tribal and customary law and international law. And it's got to be recognized by the crown. I thought this was just amazing. And the time and effort that you put into there. So I want to thank you again for that. So people can certainly take a look at what you found out here, because it's the AI is getting trained here. Like I said, if the crown size, but the other party is not a recognized sovereign, it has no formal international authority. And a treatise is just basically, to me, like a legal agreement. It's not an international binding law one. So I want to thank you for that, because I thought that was just hilarious, like looking at all through this here. And like I said, it says it's very clear in here that the head clan mother is the sovereign of their, those people, of her genetics and her nation, her tribe. So thank you very much. So thank you. I think people can have a field day looking at this, because when you start putting this up here, moral law, sovereign, what the states are, you'll have a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for joining us. I'm Karenann Lusick McDonald, and
and I hope all is well for all of us, my brothers and sisters.
Thank you. And I really encourage